Hello, adventurers. My name's Tyler.
And I'm Richard.
On today's episode, we're reviewing One More Quest by Horrible Guild. Welcome to True Strike.
Howdy, folks, and welcome back to the show.
Howdy.
We're back in the studio today with another review of a book and a game. So our good friends over at Modiphius Entertainment sent us One More Quest by Horrible Guild. So Modiphius is a distributor for them. Horrible Guild is actually an Italian-based company. And this is a TTRPG based on a board game.
We don't get too many of those.
Yeah, so Dungeon Fighter, if you've never heard of it, is a board game that was also made by Horrible Guild, which was very popular, has many, many editions of this game. I think when I look at their webpage, I think there was like 6 different expansions for this game. Massive, massive game. But in general, a not so serious take on the fantasy genre.
No, not at all.
Not at all. So if you haven't heard of One More Quest, like I said, it is just that. It's the TTRPG version of a popular board game. And what they've done is have created a system in this game that is unlike anything that I have ever played before. And when I first saw it, I thought, that sounds super interesting. And I wasn't sure how well it was going to play. So Modiphius was so generous, they sent us the book for me to read through. And it is not a small book. This is a massive, massive
This is a chonker. I don't know how you got through this whole thing.
But it is an incredibly fun read. And that's how I got through it.
That's your secret.
Because it was a joy to read through. Everything in this book was very well laid out, very well written, and very entertaining on top of being informative.
So maybe a spoiler, maybe not. One of our previous reviews, you had an issue with the index being useless.
Yes.
Did you run into any issues like that out the
I
jump?
did not run into any
nothing
issues
just
with that.
breaking.
Yes.
Okay.
There was nothing broken about this book. And in fact, everything about it just seemed to line up and just basically work.
Rad.
Which is what you love to see in a book. Also, what you love to see in a book is this nifty little thing right here, especially if you have a gigantic book.
Yeah.
Bookmarkers are awesome. Everybody has a bookmarker, especially if you're a reader or anything like that. But a ribbon built into the spine of a book, so a built-in ribbon for holding your place, is such a small feature that is so overlooked by publishers and manufacturers of books. I greatly appreciate having a ribbon inside of a book.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into the meat of the book, but we did actually play a game of this, and we actually used a scenario that was included in the book because they give you a starter scenario for a group that you can run through. There's actually 2 starter scenarios.
I was about to ask you.
There's one in a quick start guide that's available for download on the internet. And then there's another one here in this book.
So the other one you would have to search out online.
You would have to search out online.
But it's available.
Which is available. And this here is my, I guess you'd say, a gripe that I have. And it's with the Quick Start adventure that's available online.
Okay.
So this book, like I said, this is all standalone. And there's an adventure in the back of here. If you look for Horrible Guild or anything like that online, you'll notice some free materials online, including the Quick Start. Most games have a Quick Start that you can download for free, PDF style. And there is an adventure in here, and it's great. It has pre-made characters, so you don't have to generate characters or anything like that. A funny story that goes along with it. I read it. It's a good starter.
Okay.
However, the quick start that's available online is from the pre-release version of this game, and they never updated it. So this game was a Kickstarter. This book was a Kickstarter. And before that was released, they released the Quick Start edition.
Okay.
And there are mechanics that exist in the Quick Start that were removed in the final publication of the game. Most namely, the defense stat and contested rolls. So like most games, you have an NPC with a defense stat that you have to hit before you actually do damage to the health. This game had something very similar to that. It was removed before the Kickstart finalized and the books shipped. The Quick Start adventure still has that. Is it playable? 100%. You could use those mechanics and you can use them. However, if you read that Quick Start and then jump over to here, you might have a little bit of confusion as to what you're seeing.
When you're online looking at that quick start, does it let you know that it's a previous build?
No, the only reason why I know is because I'd already read this book. And that's why I say it. If I had started with the quick start guide and then used this book to reference, I would have been looking for materials in the main rule book that don't exist, because those materials only exist in the quick start guide.
Interesting.
So maybe it's just not all their links are updated and I hit the wrong link, but it was the very first link that I found, and it was to run directly on their website. And maybe they know about this, and it's not a huge issue, because that really is the only issue.
This is a very recent release.
And this is a very recent release, so they might be updating that sometime soon.
Well, fingers crossed.
But like I said, we did play this, and we're probably going to get into some minor spoilers when we talk about the game that we played.
So spoilers of the pre-built,
of the
included
the pre-built module that's in here, which is just a one-shot thing, which we're probably going to talk about later. So if you're concerned about knowing about that stuff, I will call it out once we start to talk about that stuff towards the end of the book.
Okay.
But the game itself is, like I said, not a serious game. This is a funny haha game. And you would think, being a funny game and having high levity, that they probably wouldn't put as much focus into materials here. And that is not the case. As hilarious as this game is, they took this book very seriously as far as building it out and writing it out. It is writing so well done.
Like just details of like NPCs and stuff like that? Are we talking like mechanics?
Mechanics from front to back. They did not skip anything in this. They didn't skimp in this. So for being a game that is essentially like a joke game where you're having fun and you're having a parody time of Dungeons and Dragons, they did not skimp on mechanics and explanation of those things and lore. There is so much in this book, and it is so well laid out that it just amazed me from the minute that I started reading it.
That's an interesting thing to me too, that the lore, is it like cohesive? Like lore actually makes sense. It's just in its wacky way.
Yes.
Because I've seen a lot of things in this that are just obvious parodies of all kinds of like media.
Oh, 100%. They don't shy away from parodies in here. Nothing is off limits. Like everything from making fun of like Dune in here to making fun of Hogwarts and Harry Potter, and just like everything that's in here. Like we didn't even touch on stuff. There's a University of North Carolina in here where the necromancers study. It is there's so much, and that's the first thing that I noticed when I opened this book, was the amount of lore that existed within these pages. I was shook. And I was all like, there is so much here. How did they have so much material? And it's because they're drawing heavily upon the Dungeon Fighters board game, which has a lot of expansions. So they had a lot of their work cut out for them.
Right.
They have a lot of NPC styles. They have everything. And they cover everything from pretty much every city, state, country that exists on the supercontinent that you're playing in, from like current lore to background lore to even like a pantheon of heroes that existed before time.
Wild.
Like before these times. It's insanity. I do have a question for you, though.
Go ahead.
Before we get too deep into this,
Ooh.
is what did you think about this game?
Overall, top
level. Because I don't know. We haven't talked about it since we played. So we had a game. I ran a game. I had 4 players in this game, and I generally know their consensus, as in they had fun. They thought it was a fun time.
Yes.
But that's kind of all we got, and we didn't really discuss it too much after that, especially with you. I didn't discuss.
Also,
with
you and me
at
did.
all.
Yeah, right. I spoke with one of the other players a little bit. We were mostly on page together, and you and me didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And that's because here on the True Strike podcast, we go for hot takes.
Yeah, we want hot takes and authentic impressions.
Yeah.
And I have my idea of what you think, but I don't know exactly what it is.
Okay. I thought it was fine. Does that line up pretty much what you're thinking? Okay.
100%.
It's entirely, I believe, based on my personal preference and taste in tabletop role-playing games. I think this is the perfect game to introduce people to tabletop role-playing games, to break out. It's so weird to say this, but I guess it depends on the kind of friends you have. To break out at a party, right? If you have the kind of friends that are going to either just hang out or even drink or just like funny things. If you're like the Cards Against Humanity kind of friends and you're just looking for fun things to do in a group setting, you could break this game out, no problem, have people up and rolling very quickly, and have just a total gaff. Like it's great. You could throw in all the crude humor you want, or just silly dad jokes or whatever, and it all just makes sense, and the game supports it fully. Especially if you have a GM who's very knowledgeable of the whole book, like Richard is, and can just run with anything you throw at them, you'll have a blast. Would I want to play a full campaign in this? No. I just don't. I feel like I wouldn't be able to fully commit to a character or to a narrative in the same way where I feel in other tabletop games where I'm progressing and starting on a character arc that's going to be meaningful. And some of that is because and maybe as you get, do you level in this game?
Yes, you do.
Okay, so maybe as you level, your survivability goes up. But at least in our one shot, death was around every corner, and it could come out of nowhere, right? And I don't want to get too attached to somebody, but then there's also since the game is this kind of like like vibe to it, you don't want to get too deep into the narrative either. And it would really make sense to have like a deep, dark story with a cool character arc and all this other stuff in a game that's about like frogs and knockoff sandworms and stuff like that. Like it's just a different vibe, and I want these like cool, like deep narrative games where I can tell these fun stories to my friends, where the dies and your character build and all these things like really matter, and there's some nitty gritty in there. Where your die roll and your stat building doesn't matter in necessarily the same way like it does here, and we'll get into that.
Yeah.
And that is me just throwing a bunch of words out into a microphone to say it was fine.
Yeah.
I would play it again if you were like, "Hey, do you want to play a game one more quest?" I'd be like, "Sure. For sure. Yeah, break it out. Let's do it." If you had this at Gen Con and you had the target out on the table, I would absolutely play a game with you. If we're going to commit to like a 20 session campaign, I'd do it because I like playing games with you, but I wouldn't really want to play the game. I would commit to any 20 session game with you.
Okay. And this is exactly where I thought you were going to be on this game.
Nailed it.
Yeah. And that's actually kind of where I thought I was going to be on this game too after reading the book. Because I read the book and realized that, like, oh man, there's a lot here. But do I see this as a game that holds long term? Do I see this as a game that you could run a whole campaign in, like a story from front to end?
Yeah.
And the more I read it, the more I realized that, yeah, you could totally do that. And I can see that with this game. I can see somebody building this game to be their group's game. However, I think this game is more lining up with the, hey, we've got a group of people here. Maybe we don't have the entire party, or maybe we just want to have a laugh tonight. Yeah. We want to do one more quest. And that kind of lines up with the name of the game there. One more quest is that it lends itself to, we have this group of adventurers, let's run through a one shot. It's a job. They're going to go do this job. Yeah. It's going to be silly. It's going to be fun. Everybody's going to have a good time. And then maybe we'll get onto our more serious game the next week.
Yeah, right.
Which is kind of how, I started to see this game and how it built out. But that being said, the amount that's in this book, you could easily make this a 20 session game.
Yeah.
Like you could easily flesh these characters out and keep them in a game and do a long-term game with this. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's people out there that choose this as a long-term game.
Oh, I mean, just looking at that book, man.
Yeah, it's very well set up for it. Yeah, it is super well set up for it. But yeah, your take on it is right in line with what I thought you were going to say.
And after I spoke with Jake, one of our players, me and him lined up like pretty even with each other.
Yeah.
His big thing is a total emphasis on this is great for breaking out for new players.
Yeah.
New to tabletop in general, because character creation is pretty quick. You're not adding a ton of numbers to your dice rolls and doing a bunch of math. It's very single digit kind of like,
Yeah.
addition for your math and stuff like that, which like, so we'll get to the dice rolling and how it's entirely different than any other tabletop game I've ever played in my life.
Yeah. So the meat and potatoes of this game, it's your fantasy TTRPG, although very loose version of fantasy TTRPG. If you've ever listened to anything from Dimension 20 and you've heard of Fantasy High before, it's the same level of high fantasy that you would see in Dimension 20, which is to say high fantasy, but there is obviously things that are either anachronistic or that shouldn't exist in this.
Modern amenities.
So like in Fantasy High, you've got people walking around with crystals in their pocket that operate as cell phones, like sending texts to each other and voicemails, and they have televisions and everything like that aren't really televisions, but they're projections and magic essentially. So that's the kind of game this is. So it's high fantasy with a very loose thread on the fantasy portion of things. It's got your standard 14, your standard classes in the game, but there are 14 total. Your standards would be the things you're normally used to, like your bards, your barbarian, druid, necromancer, paladin, ranger, rogue, warrior, wizard. And then there's some extra ones in here with a spiritist, who is somebody who speaks to ghosts, like a medium, think Miss Cleo. And then the elementalists, you have one for earth, water, fire, and air.
The Avatar.
So those are your standard classes, which are, pretty standard fantasy classes, and they all do what you think they do. Like your ranger is a specialist with weapons and having a pet. Your druid has furry form, so you can change it to any animal that you want to. And things like the barbarian has rage against the routine, which is your rage spell. So like this is all stuff that you're kind of used to. And then you have 6 ancestries in this. So not so many choices as far as like who you are. And that's orc, human, halfling, elf, dwarf. Those are your traditionals. And then the patrician, which is the last and final one, which is frog people, which is really fun. I love a good frog person in the game.
Of course.
But yeah, those are your essentials. So you're building an ancestry and a class like you normally would. And then you also have things like archetypes and drives that you add to your characters, which are optional. These are things that you don't have to do. We chose to do them. And you can actually choose these things, or you can roll for them on a table.
Right.
So I made my players roll for them because I think it's more fun to force people to role play things on the cuff. And it's interesting. It makes the characters more interesting too, especially if you're after working around something.
They will wildly change your perception of what your character is going to be.
Yeah, and archetypes are things like, whether or not you're a nerd or a rebel or a bully or something like that. And then your drives are things that, drive your character. So like you got weapon lover. So you built your character around, liking your weapon.
My weapon has a personality, and it's like my best friend in the whole world.
Yeah. Or you could be a cult evangelist, or we had somebody who was an animal rights activist.
You're right, yeah, which helped out in some instances.
Yeah, which was very, very interesting, and it was really cool. So yeah, that when it comes to that kind of stuff, just think your normal bog standard fantasy. You have all the things that you would imagine: spells, casting, items, and potions, and all that fun stuff. Where this game gets crazy is when you get to the actual mechanics itself. So outside of when I made them roll those d20s for their archetypes and their drives, that's the last time that you will really see a numbered die in this game, let alone a d20.
Yeah.
From there, you move on to D6s only. And even then, the D6, the only number that counts on that die is the actual 6 itself.
Yeah. If you buy their house-made dice, it's only a symbol on
blank.
The 6.
Yeah, they're called the icon die, and they're blank on all sides except for one, which has the I symbol on it. For us, we didn't have the special dice, so we just rolled D6s, and we counted everything on that as a blank side except for the 6.
Mm-hmm.
This game isn't about rolling a number on a die. It's about rolling a number onto an actual target on the table. So what you're putting out there and unfolding is an actual target you'd see like on a dartboard. So it's got zones in it that have different values on them, the outer zones being lesser and the inner zones being more. So starting at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the bullseye being a 6.
Right.
And this is an active target that you're setting in the middle of the table.
And it's a pretty big target. Like
It's
you said,
fairly
it's a
large,
fold-out
yeah.
target that comes with the book. They do sell more premium ones.
Yep, they sell more premium
but
ones.
It's a fairly large target.
They also sell different versions of the target. So they have the main target, which is what we used.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have 2 additional targets, one for challenging environments and another one for challenging situations.
Oh, that's fun.
So these are targets that have different styles of scoring. So it's not just a simple 6 in the middle being the high score and the 1 on the outside being the low score. The specialized targets have their values switched around and moved around into other zones, essentially, to make rolling even harder.
Yeah.
And the idea of this game is that you are rolling a die, but not to see the die's number. You're rolling a die, bouncing it on the table off the target, and then landing on the target. So what that means is you're bouncing it at least one time off the target, and then it has to land and stop somewhere on the target. If it stops on that zone, you look at that zone's corresponding point cost, and that's your roll, and then you add that to your stat. So if I'm asking Tyler to make an Arcana check, he will look at his character sheet, and he has a +2 to Arcana. Very familiar in any fantasy games, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he'll take his die, he'll roll it, bounce it. If he gets it on a 5, so he gets it almost at the center,
yeah,
he adds his +2. His roll for Arcana was a 7. And this game runs on a difficulty scale of 1 to 10. 10 being, heroic efforts, and 1 being something relatively easy. And that is the gist of the game.
Well,
pretty easy. The icon does make a difference. So when you roll that die and it bounces and lands on the target, if you happen to get the icon roll, or a 6 in our case, you double the number that was on there. So if you hit that 5 with an icon 6, it would be a 10. So you'd make a 10 +2, you roll a 12 on it. It's great. If ever you hit that icon outside of the target, though, it is a disastrous failure. So anything that doesn't land on the target is an automatic failure of that check. If you land with that icon, it is a disastrous failure of that check, which means that obviously something else is going to happen, a consequence of some sort. You're probably going to get injured, or something bad is going to happen as set by the game master themselves.
Crit's a crit.
A crit
if
is a
it's
crit.
In or out, it's positive or negative. One big thing.
That's it.
Is it though? So he mentioned rolling Arcana, right, to land on this target. But what he cleverly left out is that Arcana has a very special way of that you must roll the dice.
Yeah, so the core rules of the game follow something that is referred to as a throw list. And it is basically, for our audio listeners, I'm kind of showing the front of the book here, and you'll see a bunch of stuff that you can't read and a bunch of little pictures. And all these things are throw conditions. So anytime that you have to do something in this game, you have to roll the die a specific way. And sometimes it's not rolling the die at all. So for instance, an Arcana roll, most of the time is done using a roll that, let me see if I can find there's little fingers for that one. It's called 2 fingers. So an Arcana roll is basically you taking that D6 and putting it between your index and your middle fingers. So holding it between your fingers like you would a cigarette or a chopstick. And then rolling it by releasing it from those 2 fingers towards the target. So we're not just holding it and rolling it like you would a normal die.
Mm-hmm.
You're having to hold it in a specific way in your hand to roll that die. That makes things a lot harder, because now you're having to not only bounce one time and land on the target, but you have the restriction of how you're having to hold that die to make that roll.
Yep. And every kind of roll or check has its own.
Thing. And as you look at the character sheet, you'll notice it has all your normal stuff. Arcana check, you have a sneak, you have, a nature, a history, intelligence, an investigation. You have all these normal rolls that you're associating with a TTRPG. And then next to each one is a little tiny picture. And then that picture will tell you how exactly you're going to roll the die for that situation. Some of them are very easy.
Oh,
so
for sure.
Something like the 2 fingers. You're putting it between 2 fingers and just tossing it down onto the roll. Some of them get a little bit harder, like a thumb flick, which means you have to put the die in your hand and flick it physically with your thumb towards the target and try and land it and get your roll off. And then they get progressively harder. Everything from having to have your eyes at level of the table as you make the throw, or having to throw from under the table. So you have to let go of the die before the edge of the table, bounce it, and then land it on the target.
Some you have to stand backwards away from the target.
Backwards away from the
Some
target.
you have to make one hand like a gate and then bounce it through the gate.
Uh-huh.
And then, I think you're going to get to it, sometimes you got to do more than one.
Sometimes you got to do more than one. And this is where it gets really crazy. And where things like rolling outside of the box on a 6. So if you roll outside of the target and you get a critical, majority of the time, what you end up with is a complication. So something happens to your character that is further limiting your character along the way. So a good explanation of this is we had a character that wanted to try and jump on top of a wall, ended up falling off said wall and hurting his ankle. And from that moment forward in the game, every time that he was rolling with his non-dominant hand as the very first restriction that he hit. So right off the jump, he has to make all of his rolls using a hand that he's not used to rolling with. And then on top of that, every time he got another complication, he was just adding it to that same complication. And it gets to the point where you end up having 3 or 4 complications on something, and you find yourself facing away from the target, 2 feet away, backwards, having to release the die at ear level and bounce it 2 times before landing on a target for it to count.
It's nuts. Also, I love that you slipped in there off the jump, considering that's why he got injured. He had to jump on top of the maze instead of just following the maze like any other normal person would do.
And this right here, that is, like I said, the meat and potatoes of this game is the crazy skill tests that you have and why there is no defense to hit. So as a character, attacking another character or attacking a creature is very simple. You have 3 damage on your dagger. If you hit the thing, you deal 3 damage. They take 3 damage to their health. If they have 3 damage, they are dead. If they have 4 health, they take 3 damage. They only have 1 health left. It's really easy to kill a monster in this game, theoretically, because it's a numbers game. Very simple. You know, your hitting is actually just rolling the die physically and hitting the target. Once you hit the target, then, you know, you're good to go as far as hitting something.
Consider the target their AC.
Yes.
If you hit the target, you hit the monster.
And the complications here build based on how you play and situations that you're in. And if you're in a dark room and you're trying to hit something in the dark, you might have to close both your eyes before you roll the die, trying to land on a target. Now, there is practice rolls, so it isn't so harsh. So as the game master, you will tell your character what those complications are, and they'll have to, do a couple of practice rolls to get the hang of it. And then once they have the hang of it, then, you have them call like, okay, this is the one that's going to count. This is my real roll. And then they take their real roll, and then you keep that said result. In general, we had most people take about 3 practice shots or so before they took their real shot, sometimes a little bit more.
Sometimes like 10.
And it really depended on how difficult the shot was.
Right.
Or how meaningful the shot was.
That was a big one.
Because whether or not something bad was going to happen there.
As a fellow player, because, obviously Richard ran this game for us, watching my fellow players take practice shots and get the best rolls time after time after time, and then like, all right, this one's for real, and they entirely whiff.
Yeah.
It's brutal.
Yeah. And it was very clear that certain things in this game are very difficult in comparison to others. So like something like, using a dagger on somebody or like shooting a bolt from a crossbow is relatively easier to make a hit. Whereas if you look like somebody at like the barbarian of our party, his attack dealt insane amounts of damage, could basically one-shot every single thing in the dungeon lined up with you guys, but was a very difficult roll to pull off because of the restrictions that he had on that specific thing. So that's where the difficulty curve comes in, is some of these things are very, very hard and hard to do. Some of them are impossible to combine. So there are, in fact, conditions in here that you cannot combine because of the way that they work. So like if you're having to hold the die specifically between certain fingers, but then you also have a restriction where the die has to be held between the wrists, you can't really connect those
Right.
two. So you're encouraged as a game master to mix and match as you see necessary to make the role as hard as you need it to be to fix your current situation,
Yeah.
including making up your own restrictions and how to do it. And actually, I have, after we played it, I thought of restrictions
I was gonna say, did you restrict us in
to
unique and creative
imply.
ways?
And actually, one of your final roles, you had some incompatible restrictions, and I, had you do some different restrictions to make it as hard as I needed to
Right.
for your final role. And then after the fact, I thought of some more creative ways that I could have done that would have been more fun and still would have been as challenging for you that aren't included in the book itself. But that is really the biggest thing that makes this game stand out amongst other games is the physicality of it.
Yeah.
Now, a big restriction here is that you definitely have to have a play space for this, because the room that we play in is the room that we record in for most of our games. This game would be impossible to play in this room.
Very, very difficult.
At the very least, incredibly difficult.
I would have to at least take out that chair.
Yeah.
And then
you would have to take out that chair. We'd have to move everything, and
We'd have to move the
everybody
whole
would
table.
have to roll from one position, which would be that position. We'd have to make a roll zone for this. Because of some of these restrictions, like there's underleg, which means you have to toss the die under a leg while you're playing. That's very, very difficult to do.
This table's also a lot lower than some other tables.
Yeah.
So it's getting table eye levels interesting. Also, with the railing, eye level isn't eye level with the actual surface.
Yes.
Eye level for us would be the railing, which means that's
railing.
interesting since you have to bank over the railing and yeah.
So you'll have to come up with some creative ways to play in here, and it worked better for us playing inside of your house around an island in a kitchen, because it was much more open. It was a lot easier for everybody to move around the target, to see the target, to visualize their shots, to take their shots at counter height level.
I guess that's the biggest thing there.
Was a lot easier.
Is know that your players, if you're running this game, are going to need to stand up and walk around the table.
Yeah.
Often.
Now, there are ways that you can do that. So you can mold this game to fit your needs, because
of course, sure.
Obviously accessibility becomes a question when it comes to a game with a lot of physicality like this, because there are going to be people that do have accessibility issues. So people that don't walk or people that cannot stand. This game, you don't have to count this game out. There will just have to be some concessions made. Obviously there's people that, might be amputees. They only have one hand. So some of the throw restrictions in here are not going to work for them.
Right.
Because they require the use of two hands.
This is where you introduce
your own mechanics,
right.
And you can mold this game to work for your players. So don't feel like this game is inaccessible to you because you have a handicap of some sort. There are ways to work around that and still have a lot of fun with the mechanics in this game. You'll have to do a little bit more work as a game master to make this fit for your players, depending on who's playing in your game.
Right.
But there are definitely rules built into this system that allow for that. And they talk about that in here. That's actually one of the things that they bring up. They bring up accessibility in here because they realize that their game on surface level might seem inaccessible for certain players. And that's actually something that they address, which I love.
Yes, no, that's great. That's because
great.
I assumed you were actually just telling me that from your own.
Oh, not even
experiences.
From experience. Yeah,
no, they actually bring it up. That's great.
It's interesting because it was something that I thought of before I read that portion of the book, because initially that was my first thought, was like, oh, this is an interesting concept for a game, not for everybody. But then when I started reading the book and then saw that they addressed it, respect. I like that
for
a lot.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, that is the kind of the gist of the game. It's not a super complicated game. It is it's a big book.
But for sure, chonker.
It is not a difficult book to read.
And currently, it is the book, right?
It is the book, yes. Okay. So they have right now this one book out, which is One More Quest, which is the only book that you need. It's the core book. You can buy this. You're good to go. It has everything in it. Outside of that, you can buy a GM screen. They have dice that are, specifically for this game, which also goes to the accessibility issue. They have dice made of different materials as well. So they have dice that are made of a foam and have dice that are made of rubber.
I would love to buy that foam one.
They also have dice that are different sizes.
Yeah.
So they actually have dice that are larger for accessible accessibility features essentially. So if you have somebody that maybe cannot hit a target as easily or has a harder time, there are different material and different sized dice to kind of account for this that you
And that's
can
everything
use.
from players, with issues rolling smaller dice, all
Smaller
including
dice.
children
Yep.
and different age groups, stuff like that too.
Yeah. So yeah, they offer these products that you can actually get that make the game even easier or just different if that's something you're looking at too. They have also released since this another book that
Oh,
is basically just scenarios to run. So
oh,
there is an
neat.
additional book here that is just it's
This is another physical
it's
book.
another physical book,
Okay,
and I think it's about 20 or so, maybe a little bit more individual games like what we played. So
that's a perfect scenario for this.
these are great because we don't have it. So I have what I've read
So we
about it
can't review
online and
that.
everything,
We
so I
don't
cannot
have it.
review it. But what I get, the impression that I get from here is if you take the scenario that we played in the back of this book, multiply it times 20 and put it in its own book.
Rad.
So these are scenarios that are designed to be played as a one-shot adventure that you can play with everybody that takes a couple of hours, or if you wanted to, you could string them together in kind of like an overarching story to run your players through like the entire book if you wanted to, which I think is pretty neat.
I just imagine it now. It's like grabbing getting the friends, the gang back together. Perhaps going through all these little odd jobs.
Yeah, and that's kind of what the game is set up to be, is like I said, when you said you can see it being like a one-shot game versus a thing that you'd run a whole long campaign through, is that this game, when you read about it, it very much lends itself to, we've got the gang back together for a night.
Yeah.
Let's go do a quest.
One more
quest. And you guys run through a dungeon, you run through a specific storyline for somebody. Yeah, there's some hilarious art.
He just flipped a book and there's a page of someone holding a sword, and then the blade turns into a snake and it wrapped around and bit the person holding the sword.
The magic items in this game are hilarious. There's some really, really quality stuff in here. My favorite is a trash bin that you get that you stick 2 items in, and the item that you remove is a combination of the 2 items that you put in, which is just genius. And I love it. There's endless possibilities for your players to mess with your GM and for your GM to mess with your players in a situation like that. Some other items of note is the Sword of Friendship, which is a sword with 2 hilts that has to be wielded by 2 people and only by 2 people, cannot be wielded by 1 person. And when they roll dice, they have to be holding hands.
Oh my gosh.
And they roll dice
I thought
together.
you rolled the dice. Okay.
No, you roll the dice together.
Awesome.
And if that right there should tell you everything you need to know about the magical items in this game. They are all equally ridiculous and fun.
Yeah.
And they did not spare. There's so many really cool things in this book. Like I said, the lore runs incredibly deep. There is so much more in this book than I expected to be in this book. So much more.
The art is great in this book too.
The art is very consistent and amazing throughout.
It's different than some of like the other Modiphius proper books we've had, where the art is just gorgeous. This like vast, gorgeous pieces. This is just so colorful and unique.
Yes.
and creative. Like
it's colorful, fanciful, funny. Yeah, it's very consistent throughout the entire book.
Oh, for sure.
It's excellent. I did not run into hardly any areas of this book at all that I had confusion or misdirects or having to jump back and forth.
A+.
Everything in here was laid out exactly where you would think it would be, in the order that you think you would need it, and is included considering that you would never have played an RPG. So they cover everything you need to know in this, even as a beginning game master. So there are sections on here that were redundant for me because I know how to run a game. But if you're somebody who didn't know how to run a game, all that stuff is included in here to help you get through everything.
Good first system if you like comedy.
And every single, basically, city and major port town or every area of the continent is got at least 1 page, if not 4 or 5 pages worth of lore that covers everything.
See, this is where this gets really interesting for me in particular, right? I want to try Dungeon Fighter at some point just to see what the difference is. Because this, even being like the tabletop RPG version of Dungeon Fighter, Which, am I incorrect? Is it? It's more board game than RPG,
Yeah,
right?
so it's a board/card game essentially.
Okay.
Yeah, from what I've seen.
Because when I play this game, when I compare it to other TTRPGs, that's where it like loses points, right? Like I don't really stack it up the same way I do to any of those. But if I think of it like a board game that I just happen to have created a character for, it goes up in points because it is a fun game. It's just it's a different role play experience. And it's almost weird to me because no matter what game we're playing, we tend to role play even if it's unwarranted.
That's true. Yeah, we role play in board games.
We role play in everything.
Yeah.
So this to me feels like a role play board game more than a actual tabletop role playing game of that I typically partake in.
Yeah.
And it's not bad. Like I said, it's not bad. If you get that other book, I would totally play through some other sessions just to see what zany, adventures you put us through or whatever.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that is the way that the adventure that we played and the way that the adventures that are in the additional book are set up.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you imagine a lot of the games that we play, we're playing long-term campaigns in Dungeons and Dragons. When we play Monster of the Week, that game is heavily narrative based, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about storylines, we're talking about characters and emotions.
I think I know what you're about to get to. Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot more narrative going on in those games, and pretty much every game that we've played, and even other systems. So like when you look at the Dune system that we played, and you look at Dreams and Machines, these are games that are narrative heavy. When you look at what we did in One More Quest, and you look at what One More Quest kind of is that jobs kind of a system. So you guys you jumped into a thing where you had to go do a thing, and this I have it open in front of me right here, which is the kind of like the overall of the story that we did. So spoiler alert, we're getting now into the actual game portion of it. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rooms that you were going through to finish this quest that was given to you guys. And each one of these rooms was a self-contained puzzle/experience that you guys had to go through.
Right.
So in that respect, it probably feels a little bit more like a board game. Because I dropped you guys into a hedge maze with a Minotaur in the center of that hedge maze, and your whole thing was to get through the hedge maze and out the other side. There was a creature in there, which is similar to a Minotaur, but not exactly a Minotaur, and you would have to either work around the Minotaur, work through the Minotaur, or with the Minotaur, as well as the maze. So that was one puzzle and experience in of itself. You guys finish that, you move on to the cobblestone trap, which is an actual puzzle with, letters on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
That is a physical puzzle that you have to solve, where I laid out pieces in front of you, a la basically a word search that was in front of you that you would have to figure out how to pass over that. So it's very game-centric rather than narrative centric. You guys had time to talk to each other and, develop your characters as much as you wanted to on the road, walking there, just, talking within the dungeon and stuff like that. But it was more on the gamey side of things.
Yeah. I mean, our most of our other games we'll have long stretches of time without a single dice being rolled.
Yes.
Because we're just playing out moments and characters.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, NPC or otherwise, moments will develop naturally. They have a course that makes sense and it flows, versus if we're going from puzzle to encounter, etc. We were up and about and very active, always rolling to move the scenario forward in one way or another.
Yes, like moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
It actually kind of reminded me a lot of the Beholder quest that we did from was it
the one shot for that. It was a drive-through RPG.
Yeah, it was a drive-through RPG. Yeah, so that one shot was very similar to me, and it reminded me a lot of that because of the fact that was a very similar situation.
Mm-hmm.
You were like, hey, these are your characters.
Once you get down into the dungeon, for sure.
Get into the dungeon and move from room to room.
One thing I appreciate about that one shot specifically, Tale of Two Fishies, was the bit before where everybody got to pick like a job that they wanted, and they got to have like a solo moment between 5 and 30 minutes depending on their actions.
It's interesting now that I remember A Tale of Two Fishies. That right there is almost in the spirit of this game. So like the major difference between that experience and that one shot and One More Quest is the way we're rolling dice,
rolling
and the
mechanic
stats we're using.
Yeah,
but the levity of that game and the attitude of that game
fits this
theming very, very closely. Yeah,
for sure.
And the included game was actually super fun. I liked it. I enjoyed it.
Oh, it was a very good setup.
I didn't make too many changes to it. I made a couple of small changes here and there, mostly with the intro of it. Like I decided to start you guys off in a completely different area than where the dungeon was, and have you guys meet up and basically be assigned a job to go to that. So that was all not included in the module. So that was all just stuff that I wrote as an opener, essentially.
Which is wild because you wrote all the other teams and names and
Yes,
everything
yeah.
entirely unnecessarily.
That was all stuff that I wrote because the game itself basically starts you off in the city of Rowdy where it takes place, where you're all just there. And while you're there just hanging out in an inn, goblins come and ransack the town and steal a thing. And then you chase the goblins with one of the major NPCs down to their hidey hole.
Yeah.
And then she hires you guys to go down and do it. So it's very straightforward. I wanted a little bit more as far as what you guys were doing and meeting each other and kind of setting it up to where if we were to do more games of this,
some established lore.
There was a little bit more established lore as far as the cities and around and what you guys were doing and what to expect and how to move forward with another game. Because now, if we were to play this again, I already have like a jumping off point for you guys where you're at and what you've accomplished.
Yeah, we've accomplished quite a lot so far.
Destroying the city that hired you, basically. Spoiler alert, they didn't actually finish the quest.
We won, Richard.
Technically won.
We succeeded in not dying.
And spoiler alert, their whole thing was to retrieve a bomb. They had to go through the dungeon to get to the bomb first.
Which we did.
Which they did really, really well. There was the hedge maze trap. There was a cobblestone trap, which was basically just a walking on the correct letters to spell the password to advance on, which they figured that out. There was a holding cell with a large floating eye in it that could have been an ally that they just put to sleep and snuck past, which is really great. There was a large deep chasm that they had to cross, which they crossed in the correct method. When I say correct, I mean the way that the book intends them to figure it out. There are other ways to get across this cavern, which can be very creative, but they ended up actually doing the one that you're supposed to do to get across there, which is really good. And they made it to the throne room and were able to basically face the boss of the dungeon, and in true strike player fashion, somebody one-shots the boss on an amazing lucky roll that just obliterated her.
It wasn't even one of the like us, like it wasn't the party members.
No, it was a necromancer's pet.
Yeah.
A necromancer's pet zombie archer, which I gave her with a little bit of extra writing too, because there weren't dead bodies in the room, basically, but she did want to use her summon dead body ability, so I gave her a dead goblin.
You fool.
And boy, did she exploit the dead goblin that I gave her and used it to completely one-shot my boss before the boss even got a chance to use any of her own special abilities, which, it happens.
We'll never know.
Yeah, we'll never know. And then they had the chance to get the bomb out
of
the dungeon.
No, we didn't.
And they didn't take it out of the dungeon. Instead, they threw it in the big hole that they went over before.
Brought it back deeper.
Yeah, they brought it back deeper into the dungeon and tossed it down a hole and let it blow up underneath the city.
Bottomless pit.
Oh, it had a bottom.
Nah, as far as we knew, it was bottomless.
It had a bottom, yeah. Mind you, this dungeon was like literally 2 minutes outside of the main town. So they were told explicitly how powerful this bomb was.
Mm-hmm. We were.
And how much damage it can do if it happened to go off, and how that was probably a good thing to avoid.
The issue was, Richard had hinted to one of our players that there might be a secret exit. But the problem was, we weren't positive that where the secret exit was going to go. And 2, the bomb was on fire and burning me to death.
Yeah, the bomb has a timer track, and the more you fool around, the faster that timer track goes, and the more dangerous the bomb gets.
And half the party was doing the definition of fooling around. So the rest of us were burning to death.
By your definition, they were fooling around. They were having a good time.
They were ready for the end.
Yeah.
They were getting in hot tubs and lighting up smokies.
Yeah, which is in the spirit of the game.
For sure. Yeah. Just like dropping the bomb in the
Just like
bottomless
dropping the
pit.
bomb in the bottomless pit.
Spirit of the game.
I didn't think that's where the bomb was going to go. I'm happy it did.
If we had succeeded the way we were supposed to, it wouldn't have made sense.
It would have been good. In the spirit of the game, it would have been fine. You guys would have made some decent money, and you would have been the heroes and saviors of a small town.
That doesn't make sense.
Instead, you destroyed the small town.
There we go.
You're going to be famous, but for a completely different reason.
Right.
Yeah. But overall,
our tale as old as time.
Our tale worked out in the end, and it is a game that I would not mind revisiting. I do love the system. I think the book is very well written. It's probably one of the better books I've read this year as far as layout and everything like that. It still amazes me how well this book is done, considering that it's a gaff.
Yeah.
Right. I automatically assumed that, like, oh, they're just, making a laugh of it. They're probably not going to put in as much effort as, a larger publisher that's building a big serious world and everything like that. But no, it's not serious at all, but it is so well put together and so well written that this is a thing that you could definitely run so many games on. And I would encourage you guys to at least try it. This is a game that you should experience at least one time, I think, just because it is definitely different than what a lot of people are used to playing, and it is super fun for just like even a one shot. Like if you just want to run one quest just to see if your players are going to like it, I think that most of your players are probably going to have a really fun time with this.
Yeah, and they'll just want to run one more quest.
Just one more quest. But yeah, I love it. I think it's great. We did talk to a lot of the players. You talked to them a little bit more than I did. For the most part, they all had pretty positive things to say about it.
Wife, it's probably her favorite of all these systems we've run so far. And that was specifically because she has a lot of trouble concentrating. So more narrative-driven games are actually more difficult for her. But this being so physical meant that she was actually paying attention constantly. So keep that in mind. If you're the type to kind of like space out, this might actually be a better game for you. And in her case, there we go. Whereas, like I said, me and Jake largely lined up, and then you talked to our associate from work a little bit more than I did, I think.
Yeah. He was excited about a lot of the stuff that we didn't cover. So like looking through the book, because I didn't let him look at the book. I didn't let anybody look at the book beforehand because I didn't want spoilers.
Right.
And I tried not to talk about the mechanics too much because I didn't want spoilers. I wanted everybody to kind of go into this blank and kind of fresh, not knowing what to expect. So once we finished the game, he finally got his hands on the book and looked through it and enjoyed a lot of what he saw and was very entertained by a lot of the things that were in here, just as like you start to read the backstory of some of these areas and you find yourself just chuckling to yourself because it is genuinely hilarious. Like there's genuinely tons of funny material in here that's not just all making fun of existing IPs. Some of it's just downright funny in its own right. But then there is stuff in here that is directly making fun of things like, popular IPs that everybody knows and loves.
So we've said a lot of positive. I know you have at least one negative.
Yeah. So my major negative was what I brought up earlier, which was the PDF thing, right? So the online stuff was a pretty big negative for me. I did not like that. My other negative that I didn't like is also in reference to the online of this version. So I bought this book, or I didn't buy this book. I got this book from
was
Modiphius.
provided.
It was provided by Modiphius. But one of the things when you open it up, when you do buy it, you get a digital code for this book, which is really cool, especially because when you're playing a game like this, you want to be able to print things like character sheets. And those are in this book, right? So there's a blank page on here that's a blank character sheet that you can fill out. They don't have those online. So I could not find blank character sheets anywhere. But I have the digital code for the digital book.
Yep, so no issue.
So no issue, right? So I went to their website. I input my thing in the storefront, and how it works is you go through the checkout process like normal, but then you put in a coupon code that's in here for the free digital version of the book, and then it allows you to basically put in the coupon. It makes it a zero cost. That's fine. You get it. You're good to go. Did all that. Got my email. Here's the link to download your digital book. And I went to go download this digital book. And I clicked on the download link and it didn't download. It just sat there spinning. And it never actually downloaded the file. So I tried it again. and I got nothing. It would not download. It seemed like the servers were overloaded, or I don't really know why, but it was not downloading my digital copy of this book. So I stepped away for a little while and did some other stuff, and then came back a little while later, and I tried a third time and a final time, and I clicked on it, and it wasn't doing anything, wasn't downloading the digital copy of the book, and it basically, I just let it sit for a little while just to see if maybe it was, and it's just so big or something. And eventually I came back to my computer, and it had timed out long before, and it wasn't doing anything. And I tried one more time. And when I tried that one more time, I was met with a new window that just said, your number of downloads on this book has exceeded its limit. Please go to the store and buy another copy. So in the end, like I said, we got this provided to us by Modiphius. Thank you, Modiphius, for sending this to us. It was a great, fun little thing. Had I bought this, and I would expect to be able to download the digital version, I wasn't able to. So in the game itself, I had to take pictures of the character sheets and print them out.
Print out the photos. Which didn't look great.
No, it was fine. It looked fine.
If you didn't tell us, we wouldn't have known. We wouldn't have known.
Same thing with like my talents and drives that I wanted for you guys. I wanted to print those things and hand them out to you as like player materials. I ended up having to take pictures of a lot of that stuff and hand it out as player materials.
Yeah.
So this restricted me as a game master from doing a lot of things that I normally like to do, because had I had access to a digital version of this book, I would have printed out artwork for like a lot of the creatures that you guys saw so that I could provide it to you. Whereas my prints were looking very, very blurry because they were just taken from photographs in a low lit room, my basically bedroom. So it was not a perfect situation. I probably could have gone through customer service with a horrible guild to try and get another digital.
I'm sure they would have.
They probably would have helped me out. They are an Italian-based company, so there's a time zone difference here, and a lot of back and forth would have had to been gone there. I'm sure they probably would have helped me, but it would have been nice to have a link that was something that was around for a while. Or at the very least, a notification that says that I only had so many download tries on this. Yeah, because I had no idea.
You're approaching your final download.
That I was limited on the number of downloads. And I still don't even know why it didn't download. Is it because this game is so new and there was a bunch of people downloading and their servers got, overloaded? Or maybe it's just the way their servers are designed. I'm still not sure what happened there.
Downloading from Italy takes a while.
Yeah, but I was not able to get stuff. So that aside, it would be very nice if they had more free materials available online for this game. And I'm not talking about, and I'm not talking about free materials as far as like important things. I'm talking about things that are very basic, like character sheets. So a character sheet, a blank character sheet, is a pretty important thing for any TTRPG out there. And it seems like one of the things I would be considering bare minimum of offering for your game. And this is a very new game. This is like super new as when we got it. It had only been released for like a very limited amount of time. So maybe that's something that's going to be available soon. It's not as of recording here. They're still not available. I did check. But maybe that will be something that will be available in the future. But that's really my only negative here, honestly. Everything else about this book is great.
Good. Awesome.
I love it. And as far as the system is considered, I wouldn't mind playing more of it.
I'm sure we will.
I liked it. I think it's something that I definitely want to break out again. And if anybody in our group expresses interest in this game, like if I'm at Gen Con, and
I'm hoping you bring this. I think this would be a good game to have.
Oh yeah, I'm probably going to bring this. But I'm like, if we swing by Modiphius's booth,
if they have the accessories,
and they have accessories there, I'll be hard pressed not to buy them.
Do you plan on purchasing the extra little adventures, the little one shots?
That's what I'm interested in. So if we go to Modiphius's booth and they happen to have that other book there, I'm going to buy it.
Targets?
The targets, I'm thinking about buying.
Dice?
Dice, I'm thinking about buying.
Yeah, you're in. Yeah. You're all in.
Because if we're going to play this again, I would really like to play it with all the materials.
Yeah, like, I know you thought about buying the dice before we played it.
Yes.
So.
And I'm horrible about this. You give me crap all the time about buying expansions
I do the same thing.
For games before I ever play them. Right? So I did it. I played it. Now I know that I do enjoy this system enough that I would like to have some of the extras.
If you were to buy the dice, are you just looking to buy the regular dice that are blank but with the one, or are you looking to get the foam dice or something? And or is the answer both?
It's both.
It's
You
not
know
both.
me. I would buy both of them.
Why?
I would buy both
Just
of
buy
them.
the foam ones, call it a day.
I would buy both of them just because it's me. I'm really, the main thing that I won't want to get
Those
would be
one
the
shots.
one-shots, the
That's
extra
awesome.
adventures. Yeah. If that's at Modiphius' booth, that is a guaranteed buy for me. Yeah. And then, like I said, the other stuff is just cooler things that make the experience more fun, but aren't necessary. None of it's really necessary. I mean, you could easily fit almost any adventure that you can imagine into this game. They have everything so well written out as far as the conditions and the throw restrictions that you could hand me a D&D module and I could make it fit this system in like little to no time. Like it would take me almost no effort to transfer any campaign that you have written or any one-shot quest you have written to
for
fit
sure.
this system.
You could make it work for
I
sure.
could make it work with, like I said, almost no prep.
Yeah.
Like this is very well designed in that aspect. But their writing is on point.
Yeah.
It really is. And the mini quest in the back of this that we ran was so perfectly put together and so well written that I had to put very little effort into, you know, molding it to be my own. I did a little bit, but I didn't have to do a lot.
Right.
So that instills a lot of confidence in me for that extra book, that the adventures in there are going to be well thought out, well written, and a lot of fun.
Brad? So we always, whenever we're reviewing these books, scale of 1 to 10, where are you sitting?
It's high.
Is it?
It's so high. And I don't like giving perfect scores to anything. But I like going high. There's not a lot of complaints I have about this book. It's really, really difficult for me to nitpick this book. And even the 2 digital things that I face with it aren't anything to do with this book. So because they're digital things on this book.
Are we talking our first 10 out of 10 for you?
This is such a good book.
I don't ever want to say that a 10 is perfect, right?
Yes.
Because then we'll never give a 10, 1, and 2, things can always be improved upon. But if you believe it's a 10, like on an IGN scale of a masterpiece, then great.
I struggle.
Is it a 9.5?
That's what I'm saying though. I gave Dreams and Machines like a 9.5, I think. No, I gave the starter set a 9.5. I think I gave this book like an 8 or something like that.
Yeah, because there were some issues there.
I have no fault with this book. I have to give it a 10.
Really?
It is so well written, and it's just generally a joy to read, which is saying a lot for a big
That's
book.
huge.
It's a huge book. It is a joy to read. It is so well written and so well thought out for being what it is. I cannot find a fault with it.
Brad?
I love it. So thank you again, Modiphius Entertainment, for sending this to us.
Thank you.
And thank you, Horrible Guild, for producing this game, which is just amazing.
Awesome. I give it a 7. He's ridiculous. He's too high on this book. It's fun.
It's fun.
I have weird preferences. It is fun though, and I look forward to playing more.
Your opinions are valid, and like I said, exactly what I thought they were.
So, if you're more into a little less of the goofy, I want to roll dice at a target, more into character crunching and character building, deep narrative focus, you might be more like me. If you just want to have a good time with your friends and also have a book that's super funny and well thought out with actually, I want to say deep mechanics, but just like unique mechanics.
They're deep in their own way.
Then this is
they are deep
probably
in
for
their
you. You're probably
own
more
way.
towards Richards.
Yeah.
But I don't think I have anything else. I don't have anything negative or anything.
Yeah.
So
no,
that's where we stand.
That's one more quest, folks.
I do look forward to playing it at Gen Con.
I look forward to running this again.
So thank you again. Speaking of which, I was going to say, meet us at Gen Con. Gen Con was last week.
Yeah. If you met us at Gen Con, woo!
Hey, Ted and Vanessa. It was nice meeting you at Gen Con. For anyone else, if you enjoyed the video, subscribing and liking knows that thing. We are on our road to 1,000, so 1,000 subs is what we're aiming for. Appreciate each and every one of you. If you are listening on all the podcasty things, 5 stars appreciated as well. But for now, I have been Tyler.
And I've been Richard.
And we've been True Strike.
True Strike.
Bye, everyone.
See you later.
Hey, adventurers. Thanks again for joining us today. Please be sure to give us a follow on your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. If there's any questions you'd like to write into the show, you can hit us up on X, Threads, or Instagram. New episodes release every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for listening to True Strike.